To many people, keeping your arms and legs under the blankets keeps the monsters under your bed. To many, sleeping with your back to a wall keeps the monsters inside the closet. But sometimes, the monsters don't follow the rules. I was about 9 years old when everything began. My sister and I were still sharing a bedroom. We each had a twin-size bed. Mine was in the southwest corner next to the closet, and just across from the door, and my sister's was the corner opposite mine. Both our beds pointed towards the door. Our house was your typical 60s-style house, 2 floors and a basement with dark wood paneling on the walls. The top floor had 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. My parents' bedroom had the walk-in closet and a larger bathroom. The 2 other closets had the sort of sliding doors and not much room inside. But my sister and I, we shared the bathroom in the upstairs hallway as well. And, as most children do, we feared the utility room in the basement. Sometimes we would hear creaking from the furnace or creaking in the walls, and our first thought was ghosts. Most of the time, though, that's all it was, just a creaky old house. Until this one time that it wasn't. So this night was just like any other. I always had trouble falling asleep as a kid, still do. My sister and I, we slept with our bedroom door open. The bathroom we shared was just around the corner in a short hallway. I was laying there, on my bed, just looking up at the ceiling, telling myself stories until I would finally fall asleep, as I had done pretty much every night before this one. And then I heard something sort of messing around in the bathroom's trash can. I knew it wasn't Diamond, our blonde Shih Tzu. Even at that age, I knew she was too proud of a dog to sort of go around in children's trash, but I laid there wondering what it could have been. My imagination ran wild about ghosts that we believed in our basement, and the next morning I told my parents and my sister what I'd heard. Of course, they all dismissed it as the dog in the trash, even though we all know better. But it happened several more times over the following few weeks. Each time I would tell my parents and my sister. Each time my parents would dismiss it as our proud Shih Tzu. But my sister, only 8 at the time, became less and less convinced that it was the dog, though. Perhaps my arguments that Diamond never had any interest in the trash during the day was starting to make sense to her. Now, this part is something that I've sort of tried to repress, to be honest. Because my sister claims that one night I decided to get up and find out what it was that was digging through our trash can. I never described it to her, but apparently I told her that I was going to look at it and declared the next morning that it was not, in fact, our little Shih Tzu. This was again met with, "Oh, it's just your imagination," from our parents, and my sister and I, we just let it go. After all, it never caused us any harm, and it didn't seem to be doing anything other than messing around with the trash can. Except for scaring me so much that I can no longer recall going into the bathroom that night. I don't know. Weird, I know, but anyway. The bathroom creature continued to sort of shuffle around in there irregularly for the next few weeks. And during this time, my parents decided to repaint our room using a technique they saw on HGTV. They let us pick the colours. I chose purple, and my sister chose a reddish sort of pink colour. This technique was going to take a couple of days for my parents to finish, so we helped them move our dressers, nightstands and bookcase out of our bedroom and into the spare room. We took apart the bed frames and moved them into the spare room too. The only pieces of furniture left were the guinea pig stand and our mattress, which we made up with blankets to sleep on for the time being. My parents started painting, and first they primed it, then they let that dry and air out so my sister and I could sleep safely for the night. The next day, they started using a sponge to apply the pink and the purple colours that my sister and I had chosen, in sort of artful flowers, if that's the right word, all over the walls, one wall at a time. Each afternoon, they would open the windows and turn on the fans to get rid of the paint fumes. They'd move our mattresses back into place, and we would go to bed. It took several days for it to be completed, but the second to the last night my sister and I were supposed to sleep in our mattresses. It took several days for it to be completed, but the second to the last night my sister and I, we were supposed to sleep on our mattresses, and we were both a little bit sad that we only had a couple of nights left to do this. The novelty of our current sleeping arrangements had not yet worn off, but we went to bed and I once again found myself laying there, unable to sleep, trying to tell myself stories and count sheep. A couple of hours passed, I would say, and I heard my parents come up the stairs and go to their room for the night. I could see the light of their TV bouncing off the walls of the hallway. Diamond had decided to sleep with us for the night and came into our room, jumping onto my sister's mattress opposite mine. About another hour passed, I would guess, and my parents turned their TV off. I sighed as I sort of rolled over onto my left side, putting my back to the small gap between my mattress and the wall. I looked out the window at the neighbor's house and remembered all the times that they would let us use their pool, and I started hearing a sort of slight clicking sound coming from downstairs. This sound was definitely new as well. It was as if someone was tapping a pen on the hardwood floors in the kitchen or something. I ignored it. I'd never heard it before, but it was an old house, like I said. It creaked. Several more hours passed. This was going to be another sleepless night. I considered getting up and having my mum make me some warm milk again, but I never got the chance. Because all of a sudden, there was a snort from directly behind me, between my back and the wall. Instinct took over and my body just completely froze in place. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand straight up, felt goosebumps on my folded arms. I faced the room, my back to the wall. There was a small gap, maybe a foot at most, between my mattress and the wall, and something was definitely now occupying that gap near the top of the mattress. It continued snorting as well, like a warthog. I could hear it sniffing our carpet and snort as if it sniffed my mattress. It even felt like it nudged the mattress with its nose at one point. I didn't dare move, though. This was definitely not our dog, and whatever it was, it made its way down the wall towards our open bedroom door. I thought that maybe it was about to leave. Maybe it would go back into the bathroom and go away. I prayed that it would, to be honest. I feared that it could hear my heart pounding in my chest and was about to do something to me. It got to the end of my mattress, but it didn't go through the open door. Instead, it turned, and the end of my mattress suddenly compressed under a weight. I pulled my feet towards my chest, away from this thing, terrified of it touching me. I felt it sniff the mattress with whatever it used as a nose, snorting the whole time. Slowly, it pulled itself up onto the mattress, closer and closer to me. I couldn't pull my feet up any closer to my head, and I started breathing heavily, fearing that this could be the end. But then, all of a sudden, it just pulled away. It smoothly slid off the mattress, and I heard the snorting fade as it left our room. I don't know where it went. I didn't get up to follow it. But soon, that clicking noise started up again in our kitchen below us. I could hear it reverberating up our stairwell, and I tried to get some sleep, but I didn't get pretty much any that night. When I woke up, I told my family the next day. To my exasperation, I was met with the same indifference as always. But my sister stopped eating her breakfast and just sort of stared at me, her blue eyes wide in her freckled face. She chimed in that she had heard snorting last night too, but thought that she might have been dreaming or something. Anyway, the next night came and my sister and I settled into our beds, wondering what fresh horror tonight would bring. We both lay there awake. Our parents came up to bed about an hour after we did. We could see the glow of their TV bouncing down the short hallway like normal. A couple of hours later, they turned off their TV, and Diamond came into our room to sleep with us. I heard her soft footfalls as she jumped onto my sister's mattress. "Are you awake?" I whispered into the darkness. "Yeah," came the reply. We waited there for what felt like, I don't know, hours, but eventually I heard it. The clicking noises downstairs again, as if someone was tapping a plastic pen against our hardwood floor in the kitchen. But then, my body froze up again, and my hair stood up. I lay facing the room, and it was behind me again. But this time it wasn't snorting so loudly. But it did sniff my mattress again, sniff the wall, sniff the carpet. But without the snorting though, I could hear something heavy sliding across the carpet floor between my mattress and the wall. It reached the end of my mattress and I felt it pushing at the corner with its nose, I think. I hissed at my sister, but she didn't answer. I looked towards her mattress and very slowly propped my head up into my hand. I glanced at the foot of my bed and it was dark, but with the nightlight in the hallway and from the street lamp outside of our window, I could see what I can only describe as a large black sort of snake-like mass slithering around my mattress towards the center of the room. It stopped and lifted up its head, much like a cobra would, and the pointed part of its head, if you could call it that, was pointed towards the guinea pig cage. "Reese?" I whispered loudly. "Yeah?" came a faint reply. "Do you see that?" Yeah," she whispered again. "What is—" I began to speak in a normal voice, no longer whispering, but that was a huge mistake. Whatever this thing was, it slammed itself into my sister's mattress, lifting up one corner and pushing it and its occupants into the wall nearest them. And at that, the dog just took off, and how she got past that thing, I'll never know, but we just started screaming our lungs out. I remember thinking, I don't know what my parents could do about this giant cobra thing that we had in our room, but at least if they saw it too, they would know finally that I'd been telling the truth. But then, as my sister and I were looking at this thing and then back and forth at each other, the creature just suddenly was gone. Like, it literally just disappeared right in front of us. To this day, we have no idea what happened to it, but we believe that it must have gone into our closet. Well, as kids, that's what we convinced ourselves at the time what happened. My parents came running into the room and turned our light on, saw my sister's mattress in disarray, one end towards the wall. We started telling them what happened. They looked over my sister and found a sort of red mark on her shoulder where she hit the wall. They looked for the dog and found her trembling under their bed. And then they let us sleep with them for the night. Strangely enough too, this thing, it never came back after that. But over the next few weeks, I would hear this sort of messing around in the trash can at night again. And that eventually stopped, and then I heard it clicking something on the hardwood floors for years after that. We never did see it again, but somehow I just knew that it wasn't gone. Obviously, I sort of reconstructed this story from talking to my sister and my parents because I've actually sort of repressed parts of it, I think, and she had repressed others, but everything that you've just heard, I swear by it that it's true. In fact, I spent the next 20 years trying to figure out what the heck that thing was. But alas, Google, unfortunately, has failed me. And our story seems to be one that's pretty unique. So, I have no idea what happened, but I would like to ask for some help. Has anyone heard of anything like this before? Was it some sort of a cryptid, an interdimensional being, or a ghost, or were we just hallucinating? Was it sleep paralysis? If you've got any ideas as to what happened that night, then please do share it with us because we would like to try and figure this out. So, before I start this story, I just want to say that I would love if any of you have any sort of explanation to offer for it, and I hope you enjoy. So this happened to me when I was 17, around the time when most of my friends were just getting their driver's license. Well, we all had that rush for cars back then, so it was quite common for us to skip school and go for a ride out of town. The city where I lived is surrounded by forests and 2 mountains, so we basically had a lot of places to go and chill. And one day, my friend was very excited to show us a place that he had found online, possibly on Reddit or something, for which people said that was quite odd. We looked it up, and apparently it had a reputation for being a bit of a paranormal site, And being the typical group of teens, we collectively agreed to check it out ASAP, including me, who more or less believed in spiritual stuff at that time. So going up the mountain, we were listening to the radio until we lost the station to static, which for obvious reasons is what the radio does when we go deep into the woods. This entire experience, though, is happening during a summer night, so we were feeling pretty careless and as excited as a person can be. Having no music to listen to, though, we started talking and discussing our expectations for this place, with most of us having no expectations at all, just a lot of curiosity. But our conversation was suddenly interrupted by the loud static coming from the radio that we turned off just a few minutes ago. We were all a bit startled, but still nothing out of the ordinary, I suppose. It happens again a few minutes later, and we all looked at the radio because it was definitely still off. We quickly dismissed this as something that radios do for some reason, and again didn't pay much attention, thinking that it was an electrical fault. But the third time that it happened, the driver hit the brakes and stopped the car. He turned to us and yelled, "Man, did you hear that? What was that?" Claiming that he had heard a voice this time. None of us heard anything except static, but the driver said that he had had enough and he switched the engine off, so there was just no possible way for anything, including the radio, to be working. But we sat there like that for a while as well, in pitch blackness, because there were no city lights around us and the forest had covered all other light sources like stars and the moon. You couldn't even distinguish a night sky, that's how dark it was. But then, all of a sudden, the light indicating the radio turning on, and soon after, the static came again. I could tell, too, that we were all feeling a bit anxious by then. Through the static came a female voice as well, singing, and it was almost silent, but you could definitely hear it. For a second, it got louder, and then sort of fell back to silent again, and just vanished. But even weirder, the static vanished too. Once we switched the car back on and we turned the headlights on, we observed what seemed to be smudges of fingers all across the windshield. Well, we didn't turn the car around immediately, but I could tell that all of us just wanted to leave. We stopped further on up the hill, took some pictures of the Milky Way, and after that, we just went home. Ever since then, we've speculated about what the heck happened to the radio and the windshield that night. My friends actually went 2 more times without me to the same place, recording the same, including a feeling of a small push once the car was off. But, I don't know, what do you guys think? I believe that there could be many logical explanations, but considering the fact that I'm somewhat a person who believes in such stuff and had a bit of an adrenaline rush that night, it's just really hard for me to grasp something rational. Listening to some of the stories here just sort of reminded me of something that happened during my holiday this past Christmas. I went on a family holiday with my dad, mum and brother to Tasmania, which is kind of like a big island to the south of Australia. I wasn't terribly interested in the trip. I just wanted to spend some time with my family, so I left all the bookings to my dad, and I never will again. But he has his own Airbnb that he manages, so I thought that he would be able to find a decent place on his own. When we rocked up to the Airbnb that my dad booked, the first thought that I had was, if I wanted to sell drugs, I would do it here. My mum was not impressed at all, and was already telling my dad off for booking it. I didn't say anything, though. I mean, maybe the inside is nicer, who knows. But boy, was it a dingy little house. The paint was peeling, the roof was rusty, there were plants overgrown to the side of the building. Imagine that it's grown into the actual foundation and the wooden planks as well. There were 3 entrances as well. The first one I worked out was the entrance for the host. It looked okay, I guess. Not as bad as our entrance. A little tidier. It went downstairs, so we figured that after a while the host most likely lived below us. The second looked like it was the main entrance to the house, but it was sealed shut. The door looked like it would break down if anyone was to even push on it slightly, and was obviously unused. The third was ours, and aside from the overgrown plants, it was fairly normal, I suppose. But from the looks of it, we figured out later that it looked like the host had divided the house up somehow. She must have lived below. We live upstairs, but there was one half of the house upstairs that wasn't accounted for. Hard to explain, but the space we occupied only accounted for maybe half the house, and it only went up to the main entrance that I spoke of, which is the middle of the house. But we checked in, just grabbed the keys. The host has never contacted us at this point, and all was well on the inside. It did look a little old, but wasn't creepy from the get-go. I did notice some odd things, though. I only mentioned this to my dad, but there were a bunch of antique instruments displayed at the entrance, and right on the top of one of the pianos were 3 things that looked like urns. Now, to explain, I'm of Chinese descent, and these urns really freaked me out. Some people think that they're for displaying, but we used to store dead people's ashes and things like this, so I really didn't like them being there. I told my dad, and he didn't like it either, but he went and tapped the urn, what the heck, right, to see if there was something in it, but he couldn't tell, though. He did mention, though, that the one that he tapped was definitely used for ashes before. It had scripts on it for, like, safe passages to heavens and stuff, from what I could make out. But after I stopped freaking out, I went and picked the first dibs on the biggest room, as per my usual, but then noticed that there were heaps of mirrors around the room. Again, too, another thing. I'm not sure if it's a Chinese thing or not, but we don't like sleeping with mirrors facing us when we're in bed if we can help it. So I went to move one of them, which was smack bang in the front of the bed. It was leaning against a door, and when I took the mirror away, the door actually opened ajar a little. That freaked me out a bit. I got my dad, and we decided that it was better that I slept with my mum in another room, and he would take this room with my brother. There was another room, but it's getting long, so let's skip that bit. So again, my dad being dad, he opened the door a little and shouted hello before I told him to shut up. I had a peek inside, but couldn't make out much, only that it was dusty and seemed to be a part of the other half of the house. But my dad, soon after, put a chair and his suitcase on top of it in front of the door to keep it shut. So fast forward that night, everyone was sleepy and went to bed. I stayed up a little because I had some emails from work to catch up on, and I went to work in the living room area. And at one point in the night, I would say around 11:30, I remember there were a few thumps on the roof. It sounded like maybe somebody's footsteps, then followed by the loudest and most horrendous sound. It sounded like a train was on top of me. It was screeching like steel on steel, and it lasted for maybe 30 seconds. I literally froze at that point, didn't know what to do or what was going on. Thought my dad would come and check me, but no one ever did. I didn't say anything until the next morning because I thought that, well, maybe I imagined it out of tiredness or something. But the following night, the same thing happened, except I was in bed this time, just got into it as well, so not asleep yet. And it was around the same time that the exact same noise started up again. My mum woke up but was frozen like me. Dad came to check on us, but we were all just frozen there listening to this noise, wondering what the heck it was. After it stopped, we were freaked out, but managed to sort of shrug it off, and we all just went to sleep. But before I fell asleep, I distinctly remember hearing some faint thumps that stopped shortly after it started. The next morning comes, though, and we kind of had a meeting of some sorts to discuss this. And this is when I told them about the first night before. We were extremely unsettled at this point, and luckily it was checkout day, so we just got out of there, and we never really found out what it was. But here's the creepy part. So after we packed up and we were well away from the place, Dad was driving, but he looked really disturbed, so I asked him if he was okay. And he said to me, "I am now, but I didn't have a good sleep last night." I pressed him a bit and asked him if it was the noise. He said no. That didn't bother him much compared to another thing he experienced. What was bothering him most was that when he left for our tour on the second day, he still had his suitcase on top of the chair blocking the door to his room. He had just showered, so he also left the towel on the chair to hang, and he said that when he came back, he noticed that the door was slightly ajar, the chair had moved slightly, and the towel was now on the floor, as if someone had tried to push it from the other side, but unsuccessfully after they noticed that there was a lot of stuff on the other end. I forced him to ask the host about the noise in the door, and she replied that the door was the door to her art room and that the noise was just a possum on the roof. I really don't believe her though, because the noise was not something an animal or perhaps even a human can make. When I was around 13 years old and at the shopping centre with my parents, I wanted to go off on my own and wander around by myself for a while, and so my parents agreed. After a little while, I was stopped by a woman in casual clothes, and she told me that she was an undercover cop and I was suspected of shoplifting. But because I was young, I was terrified. I didn't ask her for ID or anything like that. I just didn't know that I could even question authority. She asked to look through my bag, and I let her, insisting that I hadn't stolen anything. She asked me how old I was, who I was there with, and then she asked me something that still sends chills down my spine. Are your parents expecting you to go home with them tonight? I told her of course they were. Why wouldn't they be? She then insisted that I had to follow her to go and figure out this shoplifting thing, so I went. She was leading me towards the exit, and by the grace of God, before we got there, we luckily bumped into my dad. He asked what was going on, and I told him. As I was explaining the situation, the woman got on her phone and was talking to someone, saying things like, "Oh, this isn't the right girl then, huh?" Then hangs up and says, "Sorry, wrong person," and abruptly just walks off. Well, my dad and I just sort of stood there, dumbfounded. When my mum found out about the situation, she was really unimpressed by the way that the undercover cop handled the situation. So she took me to the centre management the next day and complained to them about how I was treated by their undercover cop. When the woman answers, "We don't employ undercover cops in this centre." I have no idea what that woman had planned for me, but I thank my lucky stars every day that we ran into my dad. In 2019, I moved to a post-Soviet country for work, and there's this American diner that I always go to on Saturdays for lunch. It's a one-of-a-kind of place in the city, owned by this half-Cuban dude who loves the USA. Not surprisingly, too, the place attracts a lot of American expats who want to feel at home. It takes me around 25 minutes to get there walking from my apartment, but as it gets extremely cold during the winter months, I always take a taxi that drops me off next to a big mall, on the opposite side of the narrow street where the diner is. The street's actually inaccessible by car. So, it's sort of hard to describe it, but the best way to reach the restaurant's entrance is by crossing the fenced garden of an old wooden church. It's an Orthodox church from the 19th century turned into a museum. It's now surrounded by massive office buildings. The garden is small and you can cross it in like 3 minutes, and the exit gate faces the restaurant, and during the winter, snow covers it completely. So it was a Saturday morning, January if I recall correctly, and the snow was fresh on the floor. I was walking to the diner when I noticed unusual footprints in the snow, as if someone was walking in circles, back and forth and for a long period, but there was nobody around and all of the office buildings seemed to be closed. I keep walking when all of a sudden a man that was hiding behind the church reveals himself. He doesn't look hostile, but there was something extremely odd about him for sure. He's wearing baggy jeans, a dirty hoodie and a blue cap. It was extremely cold and his outfit was not the best for the weather, but he approaches me smiling and he starts walking on my side. "Hey there," in English. "Oh, hi. Where are you from? Don't be afraid. I like foreigners." The vast majority of the population there looks East Asian, so it's easy to tell that I'm not a local. But his English is surprisingly good. I keep walking in silence. Hey, you don't need to be afraid, my friend. I'm part of the couch surfing community. I'm a nice guy. Look. He tries to show me something on his phone. Maybe his couch surfing profile page or something. Would you be willing to stay at my place? He says. No, dude, but thank you, I say. And then he goes, okay, would you give me some money to buy us both a coffee then? You don't have to come with me. What the heck, right? At that moment, I was already in front of the restaurant and casually opened the door to enter. He didn't follow me. 2 weeks later, same Saturday routine, lunch at the diner and then back home. And on my way, I decided to grab a coffee at the nearby place, and as I'm walking to the shop, I feel someone following me. And it's him again, and wearing the same clothes, mind you. We make eye contact, and he starts laughing, but then he proceeds to do an extremely creepy thing. He hides behind the bus stop that has glass panels on the sides and keeps staring at me. I mean, I could still see him. He was being a complete creep on purpose as well, which was really strange. But I enter the coffee shop and tell the barista, hey, excuse me, but there's a guy following me out there. The girl looks at me worried and says something to the security guard. It's common to see guards in all the shops there. The guy enters the shop, and the moment the door closes behind him, the barista looks at the guard, who immediately removes him from this place. They were so fast, in fact, that it almost seemed as if maybe they knew this guy. Thankfully, I never saw him again after that. But, man, what a weird encounter.